In the winter of 1908, a man named Aleksander Nowak was measuring holes in the ground with a piece of knotted rope, and the town of Harlan, Montana, looking on from their sturdy cabins, thought he had finally lost his mind. He was 31 years old, a Pole who had traveled through Hamburg and New York. Before ending up here at the edge of the high plains, the wind had a personality, and that personality was undeniably cruel. He had a lean face, moving carefully, always recording precise numbers in the small leather book in his pocket. He had 12 cows, 4 horses, 2 pigs, and a barn that everyone agreed was perfectly adequate, yet in October, rope in hand, he paced a rectangle in the earth 60 feet away from his farmhouse. He muttered in a mix of Polish and English while his hot breath fogged in the biting morning air. Dolph Granger, a red-faced cattleman, rode past on his way to town and pulled up his horse to watch. He watched for a full minute, then asked Nowak, "What in God's name are you doing to that field?" Aleksander looked up and simply said, measuring. Granger asked for what, and the answer was a barn. Granger looked at the upright barn nearby and shook his head slowly, deciding not to argue with the whether. "You already got a barn," the cattleman said, then turned his horse and rode away toward the town. But Aleksander kept measuring 40 feet by 20, driving stakes and tying string. He walked the rectangle again and again, checking the knotted rope, and his notebook he checked until the lines were perfect and the corners were true. From his tool shed, he brought a long iron rod and a heavy hammer. He began to probe the earth, driving the rod in and pulling it out. He read a resistance in the earth that no one else could decipher. 6 feet down, his rod struck a layer of dense, cold, ancient clay. He nodded, confirming a long-held suspicion, and wrote a number in his book. He looked at the pale, washed-out blue sky of late October. The light carried a quality that meant snow was coming soon. He thought about what he knew from a long way away. His father kept animals through Tatra winters that made Montana look mild. Those barns weren't above earth where wind strips heat through every gap. They were built below the earth with thick sod roofs and deep walls. His father had called it building with the mountains help. The earth 5 feet down stays 4 to 2 degrees regardless of air. In summer it is cool, in winter a comparative furnace. His father's animals survived winters that killed all others nearby. Aleksander tried explaining this in his halting English at Harlan. The men listened briefly before returning to talk of cattle. He never tried again now. He would simply do it. The problem was money, or the near-total absence of it. Drowned oats and dry cows made for a hard year. Paying for Marta's fever had taken his summer's small build-up. By October, he had $4 to $3 and change remaining. His land note was due at the first bank. Soon Aldous Prout looked at him with a gaze of judgment. If his animals died in a bad winter, the story ended that way too. He had done the arithmetic. Without livestock, the whole enterprise collapsed. Bad winters came. Everyone in Harlan knew it and feared them. Old-timers spoke of 1886 like men who had survived a war. Cattle froze solid in fields. Horses died despite all-night fires. Families lost everything, packed up in March and went east. Beaten, Aleksander was not going back. There was nothing to go back to. He had 3 weeks until the ground froze solid to dig. He started the next morning before dawn with a roof trench. People were confused. It looked like a narrow ditch, not a foundation. The structure would sit 4 feet into the earth, well insulated. 4 feet of clay and 18 inches of sod roof. The only exposure to the killing air would be the south wall and roof. He hired Pete Aldrich for $2 a week. Despite his poverty, together they dug through the frost crust and the dense clay, moving that much earth by hand breaks those without a pace. Aleksander worked in rhythms, checking his notebook during 10-minute rests. Pete was strong as an ox and asked no questions. On the 4th day, they hit an unexpected shelf of shale. Shale does not yield to a spade. The iron rang, shifting south, would lose the vital angle of winter sunlight, renting a drill, and charges required money he did not have. He adjusted the northwest corner, narrowing the structure to follow the shale. It made the corner stronger, he wrote. Work with what the earth gives. The walls went up. As the hole went down, he traded labor for wood. In September, he labored cutting lodgepole pines for his neighbor Haverson. Haverson paid him in 3 full cords of 18-inch logs. He had studied this ancient cordwood system in a Helena journal. Logs were bedded in a mortar of clay, sawdust, and lime. Each log end faced inward and outward, providing massive insulation. This massive wall delivered R18 protection. Before adding the mortar, thousands of tiny pockets, trapped air refusing to let heat pass. His father had plastered the inside with sand and clay. This sealed the surface smooth. An added vital thermal mass material absorbs heat slowly during the day and releases it. It was like a flat stone sitting in the sun. The south-facing wall was the only one above ground level. He built it with small windows of drum-tight old paper. This passed light, but stopped the killing winter wind. 6 windows were angled to catch the low winter sunlight was directed onto a wall of flat river stones. This stone wall was the thermal mass storage element. Weak winter sunlight warmed the stones by several degrees at night. The stone released heat back into the space. This maintained the temperature above what the earth provided. Granger called out, asking if cows wanted a view. Aleksander ignored the mockery and simply kept working. Pete Aldrich asked more genuinely, "You really think this is gonna work?" They finished the main structure on November 3rd. Aleksander exhaled. His hands bled. Where cold had cracked his knuckles, he had lost 6 pounds during the month of construction. He spent $31 on labor, lime, and hardware. He had only $12 left to his name. A spring note loomed. While the sod roof remained, the town of Harlan held many loud skeptical opinions. Dolph Granger arrived on a gray afternoon to speak. Granger offered no credit for Aleksander's quiet, steady perseverance. He mocked digging a hole for perfectly fine animals. "Wasted money. Come January, you'll have same frozen cows." Widow and Berg spoke bluntly to Marta at the store. "Your husband will kill them putting animals underground like moles. It ain't natural. Someone ought to tell him." So Marta reported the town's gossip to Aleksander that evening. He noted Berg's uninsulated barn would freeze before his old Hendricks. A veteran settler came to inspect the site. He touched the cordwood walls, peering into the entrance. Hendricks warned of moisture and condensation, causing winter sickness. Aleksander showed him the ventilation slots in the wall. Each slot had a wooden plug adjustable by rope. Hendricks grunted and left, still unconvinced by the design, whether made its intentions clear. Snow fell and stayed. 2 inches of snow arrived and remained in November. The second week brought 4 more inches of accumulation. Temperature hit single digits at night. Early for Montana. Aleksander checked the porch thermometer, feeling a rising pressure. He needed the sod roof and the double door system. Aleksander worked through the nights by orange lantern light. He worked until his fingers were numb, then returned. Marta watched him from the house, understanding the stakes. Immigrants understand that certain moments are not about comfort, survival, arithmetic. Do the work or lose the farm. Alone at night, he worked the cordwood and dirt. He cut 18-inch sod blocks with a flat spade. He carried sod up the ramp to the rafters. He overlapped the sod layers like living roof shingles. He laid 3 layers of heavy protective prairie sod. When he was done, the roof was 14 inches of compressed sod. He had moved nearly 8 tons of earth. He finished the double door vestibule, building a 4-foot dead air space to hold the killing cold away. He fitted the doors with leather weather stripping cut from an old harness to seal out the wind. He tested the doors several times, feeling the air chain as the vestibule trapped the Montana chill. On November 15th, he moved the cows, horses, and pigs into their new subterranean home. They settled into deep straw, bedding their collective breath, quickly warming the enclosed space. He hung his thermometer on the king post, comparing the freezing exterior to the barn's warmth outside. Was 11 degrees inside. The temperature climbed steadily to a life-saving 4 to 4. He wrote the numbers in his ledger, surrounded by the smell of cattle and damp earth, in the flickering lantern light, with his animals safe. Aleksander felt a long-absent certainty. The weeks after moving the animals were the quietest of the whole enterprise. Snow came and went, but Aleksander fell into a steady winter routine. He fed, mucked, and adjusted ventilation plugs based on interior humidity. He checked the thermometer twice daily, recording every number in his ledger. Warmer animals burn less feed for heat and more for health. His cows produced 8 gallons of milk instead of last year's 6. Marta noted that the milk no longer froze on the way home. She passed the bread her face, showing she understood spring was possible. Meanwhile, ice began forming on the interior walls of the old barn. Aleksander said nothing to the neighbors. He simply watched and noted it. Meanwhile, Dolph Granger burned wood at a rate Aleksander could calculate from the diminishing woodpile. Granger's traditional barn had a hard-running stove. Smoke was visible from 3 fields away. At 22 below, wood is burned frantically to keep a Conventional barn warm you are heating air with no thermal mass, escaping through every crack and gap. It is like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. Alexander's structure had no stove. It did not need one animal's generate heat. A cow produces 1,000 BTUs per hour. Just existing 12 cows produce 12,000 BTUs of free trapped heat. Add the horses and stone thermal mass. Absorbing winter sunlight, all-day earthen walls held 42 degrees regardless of outside temperature. Interior temperature, on the coldest December nights, held at 40 degrees outside. The temperature was hitting a lethal 30 below. The 7-degree difference was recorded and underlined twice in his notebook. He stood in the barn certain of his family's survival. The storm came on the 9th of January 1909, and it was unlike anything. It announced itself with a strange stillness on the 8th. The sky turning pewter. Standing on the porch, Alexander felt the hair rise on his arms. He checked the thermometer. It was 8 degrees and dropping fast. He prepared the barn, closing plugs and adding extra hay bedding. He checked the leather weather stripping and ensured the water troughs remained clear inside. It was 41 degrees outside. The world was ending. At 3 in the morning, the storm hit like a train. By dawn, the porch thermometer read -37 degrees Fahrenheit. Winds reached 52 miles per hour, making snow perfectly horizontal. Visibility vanished. The fence post 12 feet away was a ghost. Alexander, dressed in everything he owned, and stepped into the gale. The drifts were thigh-deep by the house. He tied a rope to the porch rail and walked into the white. At 15 steps, the rope snapped taut. The cold hit his face like a thrown iron blade. His tears froze on his cheekbones. He found the vestibule door by simply walking into it. He pulled the door open, stepped inside, and dragged it shut. The roar became a muffle. He opened the inner door, and the warmth hit him like a physical thing. The barn was alive with the sound of cattle shifting and the smell of earth. The thermometer read 38 degrees outside. It was -37. 7 to 5 degrees of difference with no stove, just the earth. And the animals, his animals, were calm. The cows stood in deep straw. Horses shifted in their section, breath rising in slow columns. None of them shivered or fought the killing December cold. He resettled a ventilation plug that had vibrated slightly open. He added water from the insulated tank beneath the floor. The water was 36 degrees. He stayed an hour, then he fought back to the house and waited. The storm lasted 3 days of violent horizontal whiteout. On the second day, it hit -44 degrees. Interior temperature read 36 degrees, still safely above freezing outside. The world was killing everything not properly sheltered. Granger's barn door had blown open, drifts building. Inside, he kept going, barely seeing his own freezing hand. On the third day, the wind dropped enough for Hendricks. His horse refused the crossing, sensing something. Hendricks ignored. Hendricks dismounted, leading the animal on foot to the barn. 4 of his cattle were dead, frozen. Where they stood, he sat in the cold between them and cried. Widow Enberg's cows survived, but with severe permanent frostbite. A neighbor's reckless son kept her stove burning throughout. Dolph Granger lost 2 horses to the killing cold. His certainty broke as he looked at the dead. The storm cleared on the 12th. The sky went blue hard and merciless. By afternoon, the temperature climbed to -12, which felt almost warm. Alexander opened the vestibule and inner doors of the underground barn. 39 degrees. Inside, everyone was accounted for, and standing hungry, healthy cows stood in the warm smell of straw. Thinking of his father, the weight of 3 days left him record 44, low 36. Interior 8-degree temperature difference. Granger arrived 2 days later on foot, humbled and quiet. I lost 2 horses, Granger admitted. By the fence, Granger looked at the sod roof and asked to see inside. Alexander took him through the vestibule and the inner door. Granger stepped into the warmth and stopped, sensing the calm. He reached out and touched the textured 18-inch cordwood wall. He noted the angled oiled paper windows and the thermometer. 38 degrees, Granger said, looking at the steady mercury. 39 this morning, Alexander replied, checking his mental arithmetic. Granger calculated the 53-degree gap achieved without any fire. Humbled, he finally asked, "How do I build one of these?" Alexander simply said, "Come inside. I'll show you my notebook." Old Hendricks arrived later, walking with the weight of loss. He looked at Alexander with an expression needing no words. "The ventilation," Hendricks said finally, his voice echoing in the still air. "You solved The ventilation Aleksander showed him the adjustable wooden plugs Hendricks nodded slowly, and admitted he was wrong from a man like him. It was a cathedral of admission. Spring arrived, and the bank note came due. Aleksander paid it with the milk and health of his animals. He paid from the weight maintained, and the feed saved by the simple, successful arithmetic of his winter warmth, his ledger book. Starting October at $4 to $3, ended winter at 111. He stared at it. Marta found him on an April evening looking at the barn. It appeared as almost nothing from the outside. You should teach people, she said, her weary but understanding eyes fixed on the man who outsmarted the winter. I did, he said. Granger and Hendricks were building, and the Sorensen boy had come for instruction. I mean more people, she replied, looking at the man who had outsmarted the cruel Montana winter. He picked up his notebook. 2 winters of precise calculations, nearly filling the worn leather. It was a record of Tatra Mountain wisdom, adapted to the specific Montana clay, and sun. The earth is the oldest insulation people just forgot, he said softly. He looked at the low ridge in the field. Almost invisible in the light, he opened the notebook to a fresh page. There was next winter to prepare for. There was always next winter, a reality. The high plains never lets you forget, he wrote, until the lamp needed trimming. While the April dark lay soft, the clay 42 degrees down waited for someone stubborn enough to ask.